2024 Australian Grand Prix is in the books, and boy was it ever interesting. Guys, welcome back to Racing Direct, and as already mentioned, we are jumping into the Australian Grand Prix today. So as always, make sure you've already hit subscribe, hit those like buttons, leave those comments, you already know what to do. Let's jump right into it. Now the first thing obviously to jump into is somebody actually passed Max Verstappen on track and not during the pit stops. Carlos Sainz went flying past Max Verstappen in his Ferrari. However, we quickly found out there was a serious issue. Verstappen was already complaining that he was losing the car. Something felt very, very strange. And then on lap 3, that's when we started to see the smoke and we realized that yes, something was very, very wrong. So it looks like the right rear brake was stuck and it was actually affecting the suspension and just ripping apart the rim, and that's where all the smoke was coming up from. Eventually it caught on fire and completely exploded. There was no way they were going to fix it, and for the first time since Australia 2022, ironically, Max Verstappen was not going to finish a Grand Prix. That meant that the Max Verstappen podcast was put on hiatus for one race weekend, and we were going to get another race winner, and my goodness, the smooth operator himself, Carlos Sainz, really stepped up to the plate. What a comeback story it was too. I mean, he just missed the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix 2 weeks ago for appendicitis. He jumped straight back into the Ferrari in the next race weekend and gets the overall Grand Prix victory. It was just unbelievable. I mean, after that overtake he made on Verstappen, he just never looked back. He had pressure from Leclerc, Norris, and Piastri. He just held his own, put in some great laps. No one could touch the smooth operator in Melbourne. And I mean, if you want to talk about a statement race from a driver, this is it. Of course, Carlos, is getting dropped by Ferrari at the end of the season to make way for Lewis Hamilton. Clearly it didn't sit well with him, but he is just not sitting around and letting it get to him. He is using it as fuel. He even joked that he still doesn't have a job for next year. However, I don't think he's going to have any problem finding one. He has been lights out these first 2 races that he's actually competed in, and I think it's only going to get better personally. I mean, what is really stopping this guy aside from a functioning Max Verstappen and a functioning car? Aside from Verstappen though, Sainz has probably been the second best driver this season, or at least that's my pick, I would say. I don't really know anyone, maybe Leclerc or maybe Piastri, I'm not really sure. I'm pretty confident though we could say Carlos Sainz has been second best behind Verstappen. But speaking of the man who is going to be replacing Carlos Sainz in 2025, Lewis Hamilton, man, things are only just getting worse for him and Mercedes. That car right from the start of free practice 1 looked absolutely terrible on this Albert Park circuit. It looked like they were having an absolute handful trying to take it around the corners. It was just incredibly loose. Martin Brundle, other commentators were saying that as soon as they got on the gas, the car looked extremely slippery. They were having a terrible time with it. We saw Lewis Hamilton again go off track in corners 1 and 2. It looked absolutely dreadful, and then of course, to top off the fact that the car just really isn't good, it's slow, it's hard to drive. Now they're having some mechanical issues. A complete power unit failure for Lewis Hamilton ended his race. It's just really not looking good for him. And of course, his teammate George Russell was having a better race, although again, not exactly where Mercedes want to be, fighting for the likes of 7th and 8th and 6th positions. He was having a fantastic battle with the wily old veteran Fernando Alonso that ultimately culminated in a massive accident. Now, this one's highly debatable, and honestly, might have to do a whole video on this one, but we did see from the telemetry, yes, Fernando Alonso let off in this case a lot more than he usually did through that particular corner where Russell crashed, and that basically completely threw Russell off. It really caught him off guard, and you can see he tried to make an adjustment, threw himself right off the track, and obviously into the barrier, had the massive crash, and that ended the race. Now, Alonso received a 20-second penalty after the incident. It's a little strange. We don't usually see a driver receive a penalty when there was absolutely no contact made. However, the stewards, after looking at the telemetry, there was a bit of a brake tap as well. Wouldn't be enough to call it a brake test. It was really just a bit of a blip on the pedal. They were concerned though about him lifting off, which really surprised Russell, and that dirty air obviously sent him flying off the track. Honestly, I thought there might have been enough room for Russell to do a better adjustment. Obviously, yes, they don't have brake lights, but again, as I mentioned, it was a tiny little blip from Alonso. It wasn't really the braking that the stewards were concerned with. It was him letting off, which really was the catalyst in the crash. That was what got him the 20-second penalty. I don't really know how I feel about this one. I'm not too convinced that it warranted a penalty, or maybe not to 20 seconds. I thought that seemed a little harsh. Bumped him down 2 spots. He fell behind Lance Stroll and Yuki Tsunoda. And by the way, shouts out to Yuki Tsunoda. After Helmut Marko called out him and Daniel Ricciardo for being too slow in the races, man, this guy showed up. I mean, honestly, I think he's been pretty good the first 2 races as well. The car was just a bit of a dog, and now you can see on a track that's performing a little better, Tsunoda did a really good job. So shouts out to Yuki. Big 6 points in the bag for Visa Cash App RB. Still a horrendous team name, by the way, but whatever, they're starting to pick up the pieces, I guess, and getting slightly better. Unfortunately, Daniel Ricciardo, can't really say the same thing about him. He's still really fighting that car. The pace just isn't there. He even said he was very surprised how far he was behind Tsunoda after qualifying. Something has got to click soon for Daniel Ricciardo, or he is just going to keep facing more and more criticisms. On a happier note though, double points finish for Haas after that Russell accident. That means Magnussen and Hülkenberg both finished in the top 10. They're kind of proving a bit of people wrong. It's been a great debut so far for the new team principal Ayo Komatsu, who I think has done a pretty good job of building honestly a pretty decent car. And 2 other teams that obviously had a nice double points finish. Ferrari with that magical 1-2. Again, Carlos Sainz just commanding the race. Charles Leclerc did very well to hold off the 2 McLarens. Another great race from him. But McLaren also looked stunning. This felt like the 1970s, to be honest. It was McLaren and Ferrari running the show in positions 1 through 4. Norris and Piastri both did a great job, though, managing the tires very well. Good strategies, I would say, from them. Maybe they could have done a little bit better to take the fight to Leclerc and potentially get second for Norris. However, I think they were very happy settling for a 3rd and 4th. Not much you can really ask for them. The only thing, though, I will point out, a bit of a thorn in Norris's side is with that podium finish, he is now past Nick Heidfeld for the most podiums in Formula 1 without a race victory. So that non-win in Sochi a few years ago is really starting to sting even more, and if Verstappen just keeps winning and winning all the time, it's going to be a long time before we see Lando on the top step of the podium, but hopefully he can pick one up sometime soon. But yes, some great performances all around. Again, shout out to Carlos Sainz, the smooth operator, and Ferrari for that 1-2 finish. It was honestly kind of nice to hear a different national anthem play on the podium for a change. No offense to the Dutch or the Austrian anthems, but my god, that Italian one just sounds so cool when everybody starts singing it together. So huge shouts out to Ferrari for just commanding that race from start to finish. It was a well-deserved 1-2. The other thing I want to point out is the triumphant return of Gunther Steiner to the paddock doing the podium interviews. That was the weirdest and wildest thing. I was not expecting to see him talking to Carlos and Charles and Lando after the race, but it was awesome. Everybody misses Gunther, and it was glad to see him back in the paddock. But guys, I would love to hear your thoughts about that Australian Grand Prix as well. Let me know down in the comments. I thought overall it was a pretty entertaining race. I'm not just saying that because Max Verstappen DNF and we saw a different winner. I thought there were some great battles throughout the field, some awesome strategies too, some good bits of action. I thoroughly enjoyed that one. And yes, as mentioned as well, I think I'm going to have to do a whole video on that bizarre penalty with Fernando Alonso and the incident in the last lap with George Russell. But we'll get into that later. For now, just tell me your thoughts on the Australian Grand Prix. Of course, again, I'll remind you to make sure you hit subscribe, hit that like button, share these videos. It really helps, guys. Really appreciate it. We'll see you next time on Racing Direct.